Imagine a world where death isn't just the end, but a gateway to glory, terror, and eternal service. A world where you might willingly walk into a blazing fire for your leader, or be buried in a swamp to keep your restless spirit from haunting the living. Welcome to the chilling and brutal realm of Viking death rituals. These ancient practices are darker, stranger, and far more real than anything you've seen in movies or TV shows. So, are you ready to dive into the eerie customs that made the Vikings so feared, even in death? Let's uncover 10 Viking death rituals that will leave you stunned, and maybe a little uneasy. Let's start with a story that could freeze your blood. Picture this. It's 922 AD, and an Arab traveler named Ahmad ibn Fadlan stands on the banks of the Volga River, witnessing a Viking chieftain's funeral. What he sees horrifies him. After the chief's death, a female slave either volunteers or is chosen to join him in the afterlife. For days, she's treated like royalty, fed the best food, given alcohol, and pampered. But on the final day, the mood shifts. She's led to a funeral ship, where a ritual priestess, known as the Angel of Death, stabs her while others hold her down. Her body is placed next to the chieftain, and the ship is set ablaze. To us, this sounds like a brutal act, but to the Vikings, it wasn't murder. It was a sacred duty. They believed the chieftain needed company and servants in the next life. This sacrifice was a sign of ultimate loyalty, a way to ensure eternal service. But can you imagine dying for someone else's journey to the afterlife? It's a chilling thought, and it's just the beginning. Now, let's travel to Sweden, to a place called Uppsala, where the Vikings held a massive pagan festival every 9 years. If you're wondering what a pagan festival is, think of it as an ancient religious event where the Vikings made offerings to their gods for blessings. But this wasn't a cheerful celebration with songs and feasts. It was a bloodbath in the shadow of a huge temple, surrounded by statues of Norse gods like Odin and Thor. They sacrificed 9 males of every kind: dogs, horses, and even humans. These victims were hung from sacred trees, their bodies swaying in the wind, their blood soaking the ground below. To us, this might sound like the plot of a horror movie, but to the Vikings, it was a holy act. They believed these sacrifices would bring good harvests, victory in battle, and fair weather. While some historians debate how widespread these rituals were, archaeological finds near Uppsala have uncovered mass graves with bones showing clear signs of violent death. It's proof that this wasn't just a story. It happened. So, what would you sacrifice for a better future? But not every Viking death was about honor or sacrifice. Some were about punishment, even after life ended. Across Scandinavia and the British Isles, archaeologists have dug up graves that tell disturbing stories. They found bodies with heads cut off and placed between the knees, or even outside the grave. Others were tied up, hands bound behind their backs, feet locked together. What was the reason behind this? Many of these seemed to be sacrifices, perhaps enemies or slaves. The odd positioning might have had a spiritual purpose, like trapping the soul to stop it from seeking revenge or marking the person as dishonor. The Vikings feared something called a draugr, a kind of ghost or undead spirit. They believed that if someone died violently or without honor, they could return to haunt the living. So, they took extreme steps, cutting off heads, binding limbs, anything to keep the soul locked in the body. It's easy to call this superstition today, but imagine living in a time when you truly believed the dead could crawl out of their graves and come for you. That's the kind of fear the Vikings lived with. How far would you go to protect yourself from a ghost? Now, let's dive into something even creepier. Imagine being so feared, even in death, that your body is hidden away where no one can find it. In the cold, wet lowlands of Scandinavia, archaeologists have stumbled upon something bizarre. Perfectly preserved Viking bodies in peat bogs. Their skin is still leathery, their hair intact, and even the food in their stomachs remains after over 1,000 years. But here's the disturbing part. Many are naked, some mutilated, others bound with rope burns around their necks. Some were stabbed, others show signs of torture, and many were buried face down. Why? We don't know for sure. Were they sacrifices to the gods, punishments for terrible crimes, or something even darker? Unlike the grand funeral ships or massive burial mounds, these bog burials were secret. These people were killed quietly and buried far from anyone, as if the goal was to erase them completely. It's a mystery that still haunts historians today. What secrets do you think these bog bodies hold? Let's shift gears to something more familiar, but no less dramatic. The iconic Viking fire ship funeral. You've probably seen this in movies. A wooden boat carrying a warrior's body, surrounded by treasures, weapons, and food, set ablaze as it drifts into the mist. It's cinematic, and guess what? It's real. When a high-ranking Viking died, their body was placed in a boat with everything they might need in the afterlife: jewelry, tools, and sometimes even living companions like dogs, horses, or slaves. The ship was then set on fire, either launched into the water or burned on land. The flames symbolized purification, and the ship was a vessel to carry them to the next world. For the Vikings, death wasn't an end. It was a journey. If you had wealth and status, your final trip would be as grand as your life. But here's the catch. Most Vikings couldn't afford this. Ships were costly, and even firewood wasn't cheap. Still, finds like the boat-shaped graves in Norway and Sweden prove this tradition existed, especially for chiefs and elites. Can you imagine a funeral so epic it's remembered for centuries? But a fire ship wasn't the ultimate honor. There was something even more powerful in Viking culture: your last words. The Vikings believed that how you died mattered, but what you said right before could make you immortal. Take the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok. According to old stories, he was captured by King Aella of Northumbria and thrown into a pit of venomous snakes. As the poison took hold, Ragnar didn't cry out or beg. Instead, he mocked his enemy, saying, "How the piglets would squeal if they knew how the old boar suffered." It was a cryptic message, but everyone understood. My sons will avenge me, and they did. Years later, Ragnar's sons led the great heathen army across England, and King Aella was brutally executed. Even if the exact words are a myth, the attitude is real. Vikings didn't whimper in the face of death. They made sure their final words struck like a blade. Some even turned their death into a story worth retelling. So, what would your last words be if you knew they'd echo through history? Speaking of being remembered, the Vikings had another way to ensure their legacy: massive burial mounds. Forget simple graves. For Viking elites, the afterlife demanded something monumental. Across Scandinavia, they built huge mounds, some as tall as houses, over tombs packed with treasures, tools, sacrificed animals, and even ships. One famous example is the Oseberg ship burial in Norway, where a full-sized wooden ship was buried under a giant mound, carrying 2 high-ranking women, along with ornate carts, textiles, and sacrificed animals. These mounds weren't just for the dead. They were landmarks for the living, reminders of who once ruled, and symbols of their continued presence. In a way, they were the Viking version of pyramids, but built into the earth. They also served a deeper purpose: memory. To the Vikings, being remembered meant living on. So, a mound wasn't just a grave. It was a way to keep the dead present. Next time you see a hill in a Nordic field, think twice. It might not be a hill at all. It might be a legacy. But not every Viking needed a giant mound to stand out in death. Sometimes, all it took was a mark on their body. Imagine facing a Viking warrior in battle and noticing deep grooves carved across their front teeth. Archaeologists have found Viking skulls with these mysterious dental markings. Why did they do it? Some think it was for intimidation, to scare enemies. Others believe it was a sign of status, like a warrior's tattoo. There's also a theory that it was ritualistic, A mark made before death to show bravery or loyalty to the gods. Whatever the reason, it's a chilling reminder of how far the Vikings went to make an impression. Even in death, what mark would you leave behind? Now, what about ordinary Vikings? The farmers, mothers, and blacksmiths. Even their funerals carried deep meaning. To the Vikings, death was a journey, and you had to pack for it. A blacksmith might be buried with his tools, like iron tongs or unfinished blades. A woman might have keys, jewelry, or a spindle by her side. Children were often buried with toys, tiny swords, wooden animals, or carved combs. These weren't just random items. They were proof of who they were, a final statement to the world. This is my identity, and I'm taking it with me to the next life. But not everyone got this honor. Some were outcasts in life and erased in death. Under Norse law, an outlaw called a skogangre lost all rights. No funeral, no grave marker, no story. Their memory was wiped from the earth. For the Vikings, that was the real death. If no one remembered you, it was as if you never existed. So, if you died tomorrow, what would they bury with you to tell your story? We've explored the intense, the brutal, and the haunting side of Viking death rituals. But there's so much more to their world. If you think their funerals were wild, wait until you hear how they survived the harshest winters with no fire, no heaters, not even a blanket. Click right here to step into a freezing night where survival meant everything, and discover how the Vikings conquered the cold against all odds.